Welcome to the webinar, Digital Full Arch Restorations That Work. This lecture will be presented by Jimmy Stegall, CDT, and we will begin shortly. And now it is my distinct honor to introduce Jimmy Stegall, CDT, a dental industry operational, management, and technical guru with 4 decades of experience. Jimmy Stegall is also a clinical educator, trainer, and published author. His impressive career includes 35 years growing and leading a major dental lab in the Southeast. And in the past 7 years, he has presented more than 460 educational and training events on implant and prosthetic restorations. Recently, the National Association of Dental Laboratories recognized Jimmy as their 2024 Excellence in Education Award winner, and his expertise as a thought leader, educator, and mentor has helped to advance cutting-edge digital techniques in dental practices and laboratories across North America. And now I get to say, take it away, Jimmy.
Thanks, Jessica. Good to be with you again. Big trend in our world, full arch implants. There's all sorts of solutions and options. So I'm just going to hit on some key points of some of the most successful ones that we've seen and that are being done quite often. So we'll step right to it. Just a quick overview of, she's already done that part of introducing me, of what's out there, right? So obviously the most common is the overdenture, the locator type. And very common, but I've always been the guy that I'd like to have options, right? So if we have a patient in a chair like this, and maybe they're asking about implants, or maybe they say that I'm tired of dentures. You look at ridges like this, and a great set of traditional dentures is a good solution. But patients have needs, desires, and requests, and so it's nice to present the options and help them walk through the decision process. So in reality, this is what we have today. We could do a basic attachment, maybe just what's called a trailer hitch, a little ball with an O-ring up in the denture, something as simple as that, and then move into the locators and, go to the other end of the scale for the total fixed, something that we're going to bolt in, it's going to stay in. And then there's one we're going to talk about tonight called fixed/removable that, is not as well known, but I think is a good alternative solution. Again, not here to spend a lot of time on locators because they are very common, very well known. Again, the most prescribed implant edentulous restoration out there for attachments, very available for all systems, simple, requires very minimal height, and as long as they're done well, the durability is there. So lots of advancements in locators. The most current generation has more retention. We've got scan post. They have a fixed version now, which I don't know how successful or how many are done, but it's unique to see the development out there. We move to the other end of the spectrum, right? We start with just simple overdentures, still a removable denture. It's still tissue borne. To the other end, like this, and so the fixed. This would be the typical all on X, and the options are as variable as clouds in the sky. We can make these things out of just about anything these days. I would say the most common is a solid piece of zirconia, but there are now, I see a trend moving to a metal reinforced zirconia restoration. But if we summarize these into one group, it is a fixed appliance. It is something that is bolted to the implants. It is totally implant borne, as opposed to the locators, which is still primarily tissue borne, but yet implant retained or implant supported. Whereas this fixed restoration is 100% implant borne and supported. So when a patient says, I would like to have teeth again, I would like to feel like I felt when I had teeth, that's what we're thinking about. And that's the conversation we have. And so we'll talk about some of the options and how we're getting through that. But in the end, regardless of the process, regardless of the implant system, regardless of the restorative system, they all look like this, right? They're 4 to 6 implants. We're going to maybe have some sort of abutment correcting angulation. Then we're going to bolt this appliance to that. And that's kind of the overview of how they all work. So once you understand that whole process, it becomes a simpler workflow and you just have choices, right? But for the patient's perspective, they're just saying, hey, I'd like something that I don't have to take out. So we go through the process. Now, these aren't without their dilemmas, right? In the beginning, we had to learn our way through this. And, you were trying to not only give the teeth back to the patient, but you were trying to maybe cover up some bone loss or maybe give the lip support. And we learned pretty quickly with these appliances, they had to be cleansable. And so we moved totally away from what you're seeing here, right? Things that might be scalloped, things that overlap the ridge because they were impossible to clean. And again, we've kind of, gone through some development of what type of restoration we are bolting to these implants. And whether it's a solid piece of zirconia like the one at the top, or whether it's a modular type system where there's a zirconia frame and then maybe individual zirconia crowns or Emax type crowns or bridges. And the concept here is a less bulky restoration that if anything fails, hopefully it's one of the crowns so that we can leave the main frame in the mouth and only have to replace or restore the crowns. Lighter weight maybe for the patient. And these PEEK or titanium frame options are out there now. So certainly a lot lighter weight, but we have these super high strength polymers that absolutely could be, a replacement that, some people are using for weight. Very, very hard to mill, very expensive, but a really good solution, in my opinion, for as far as weight goes, but yet still maintain the strength. The one on the bottom would be, a solid titanium where maybe we've added some pink porcelain or pink composite, but yet we've made, 3 zirconia bridges. And this was for a really tough case that kept breaking. So, we went to the maximum strength. Because of digital technology, we can do all of these things. We have these choices, we have these options. And again, I say it, that I'm a guy about options. I don't want to say to the patient, this is the one best solution for everything. It's not, right? There's always alternatives that we need to have when we're trying to describe a treatment plan or give the patient the option. So let's talk about this one that maybe is not as well known, and the product is called Conus. It's a pretty unique product, but it was developed from an older stock component, but it is a custom component. So the Conus concept is based on custom abutments. So why custom? Well, because implants aren't always placed ideal, and we would love to have everything parallel. In order to do that, we've got to custom generate these abutments. So these are custom generated abutments that correct all the angulation. And then there are these gold alloy housings that are the retentive elements that go up inside the denture. And the denture may or may not have a strengthener. I'll show you some options. But these retentive elements are way more retentive than a typical locator type appliance because, it's metal to metal and super frictional. It's a telescopic friction, conometric type fit. And so I think about 2 beer glasses that are wet. It's hard to get them apart. Same concept here. But it is still a fully implant-borne appliance. And so what makes this workflow unique is that we can offer the patient a fixed feel, right? So totally implant-borne. So it's not moving around. And it feels like, an all-on-X screwed-in appliance, but yet it can be, or it is removable. And there are multiple options of why you'd want that, right? Maybe I want a flange, that kind of thing. And so this became my what else you got appliance, right? And when a patient might say in a consult, I'm tired of taking my teeth out at night. I don't want dentures anymore. So obviously we're going to have the all-on-X conversation. We're going to have the fixed conversation. And we go through that process and we talk about the treatment and the surgery and the time and the healing and the cost, right? They want to know that pretty quick. And they would say to me, what else you got, right? And I said, well, we could do a locator, right? And no, I don't want that. What else you got, right? And that's where Conus came into play for me. It became my what else you got appliance because it was something that we could do cost-wise in between a locator type denture and an all-on-X appliance. But it was a removable. So, it was a little bit of a trade-off for them, but it felt like fixed to them. So it was good. And where it came from was right here. This is what we're looking at is a Syncone. A Syncone product was an ankylose product, and it was a stock implant abutment with a Syncone cap, that gold alloy cap. And there were only two angles that were straight and an angled one. And so that limited us in how many of these we could do, right? Because the angle had to match the implant placement. And if anything was outside of that parameter, then this didn't make sense because these abutments have to be parallel for this thing to work really well. But when it did work, it was a great solution, right? The great retention, pretty easy thing to put in, but the angles were tough because it does have to be parallel. Well, when the Atlantis company and Ankylos company merged, Atlantis had been making custom single tooth abutments for a long time. And so they had that technology down. They had the FDA clearance down. They had everything. And what they did was merge these two concepts. So they took the customization ability of Atlantis and merged it with the Syncone to create a custom Syncone abutment. Right. And they gave it a new name. They called it Conus. That's the story of this thing. But the net result is it is a custom abutment that corrects all the angles so that the abutments can be parallel, but it uses the same Syncone cap that we used with the stock system way back when. So there wasn't a lot of new product development. So it's affordable, but it is all digital. The workflow is completely designed, and the abutments, of course, so we get the angles right, all digitally created. And it's incredible. The retention is amazing. We just can't get excited enough over how good this retention is. And again, I liken it to beer glasses, right? How hard they are to get apart. This thing actually gets more retentive with time. This thing is so retentive that we have to coach our patients when we deliver that, look, this is how it goes in, this is how it goes out. And we want to make sure you can do that, adequately, but don't leave it in, longer than 2 or 3 days. If you don't take it out for a couple of days, you're going to really struggle, because what happens is this swedging actually continues to go during mastication, and it's hard to get it out. And it's all due to this retentive element of these conical housings fitting over these titanium abutments. And they don't wear out. They get more retentive with time. So the engagement is really good. It's only really retentive in a couple of millimeters of path along this side. So very good design, very retentive. But what it does is it gives a fixed feel. And so we can make whatever we're making around it, like typically a denture, in any shape or fashion. It can be like this one, which is, a typical all-on-X convex look, or it can have a flange on it, which is the big win here, right? Because there are times when we would do an all-on-X appliance, right, which has to be rounded and convex and maybe even above the tissue a little bit. But aesthetically, that would not a good solution for some patients. It would show, right? And patients didn't like that, or they needed lip support. And so we needed a flange. And an all-on-X appliance, you just can't do that because they can't take it out to clean it. And the Conus gave us a great solution to where we could offer these alternative designs, but yet still have the fixed feel, but at much lower cost. So the Conus cap works, I call the business end of this thing, in that what is termed the magic millimeter. That 1 millimeter you're looking at, that's where the swedging really takes place. Now, this also where the most problems creep up, during, when we're delivering them, because if you notice, there's a space around that magic millimeter from the denture base. So there's room for that swedging to happen. And if we don't do the pickup just right and we get acrylic into that space, then we can't get the swedging, which means we don't get the retention. So the number one call we would get at the lab is that, it fits good. The retention seems to be there, but the patient's able to dislodge it with their tongue pretty easily. And it's just a simple turn the denture over and see if you see the space around that millimeter of the cap. And typically what happens is, some of the pickup material got in there and it invaded the magic millimeter space, which wouldn't allow it to swedge. So it was not very retentive. So it just takes a 557, we go around it and open that up. We never adjust the inside of a Conus cap. We just want to make sure that we have that swedging ability. That's what gives it its retention. So you step back and you look at this thing and you think, okay, what's good about removable locators, right? It's affordable. It's proven. It can almost be done totally chairside. We can take an old denture and retrofit it with 2 implants and 2 locators pretty quickly, pretty easily, pretty affordably. And it can take maybe that 80-year-old grandmother that says, I really don't mind my denture. I just wish it stayed in a little better. Right? We could put 2 implants in, retrofit her dentures, and solve that problem for her. And that's a good solution for that situation, right? So affordability, proven, it's a good choice. The other end of the spectrum is the fixed, somebody that wants teeth. And we know the great successes we've had with all the fixed treatments we've done. So a full arch, all on X is a great solution. And they both have their benefits. What the conus does is give us both fixed and removal benefits. So it's a great alternative, or in my world, it was my what else you got restoration. And it serves that niche very, very well. It's a great solution for, those type of patients that says, hey, I don't want to do all that, but I don't want locators. So we'll go through this workflow to have an understanding and give you, a couple of looks at this of how it might be done traditionally or how it might be done digitally. But at the end, that's what we're looking at. So in the first appointment, with any, denture implant case, then there's obviously impressions and occlusal records early on, right? And so, normally with implant patients, we're going to do just traditional dentures and prototype, right? We're gonna put these dentures in, we're going to adjust, right? We'll get the teeth set, and once we have the dentures designed where the tooth position is pleasing to the patient, right? We got the bite right. Now we can move forward to, okay, let's get the implants in there and let's start with our impressions. So, we would make wax rims, we would take traditional impressions. Always like to put cylinders in the bites in the wax rim so that we could get a good stable bite. But appointment one, and this is after the prototyping, we're ready to go. Implants are in and they're healed. We start with our impressions. Now, in the digital realm, right, we could do that same appointment one with a scanner. Right? We could take scan post, and this is just a 3-unit bridge, but you kind of get the idea that we can use scanning technology to capture that data just as easily as we use impression trays, impression material. So whichever way, whether I'm taking an impression or I'm taking a scan, that goes to the lab, and the lab's going to do a setup for the implant restoration. And again, that could be traditional workflow. It could be a base plate and wax. Or it could be designed in a computer and printed as a prototype, whether it's, tooth colored or pink is irrelevant. I have two choices of how I'm going to create this second phase, right, for your next appointment. So a second appointment, if it's a traditional wax up, right, the patient's coming in and we're going to put these teeth set in wax over the cover screws. Maybe I put a cylinder in these as well to give the doc, let's just put in 2 screws, just kind of hold it in place while you check the bite, check the tooth position, check the buccal quarter, size of ledge, midline, horizontal plane, all the things that we would check, right? In a digital workflow, right? Those are printed prototypes. It's as simple as maybe screwing them in with 2 screws and then, tap, tap, grind, and checking all those things on a printed prototype. Either way is effective. Once we have that dialed in, then that modified tray, and maybe you moved the teeth a little bit in wax, maybe you took a new bite, or maybe you actually did some occlusal grinding on the printed prototypes. All that data then is sent back to the lab via either just physically sending it back or scanning it and sending it back. And the lab's going to bring that modified prototype in, the data in, and say, okay, now we know where the teeth are going to be. Let's get the custom abutments designed. And so that data is transferred to the design process, and the abutments are designed to fit within that tooth space, but yet paralleled and custom. So the lab is going to get those abutments and they're going to say, okay, do I need a strengthener? And there are various options, but most of the time we're going to put a strengthener in there. In the beginning, we would wax and cast these, right, out of a chrome cobalt partial denture alloy. And we would make the strengthener, and then we would send the strengthener and the abutments and the housings to the dentist, and the dentist would take the cover screws all out, put the abutments in, engage the caps on the abutments, and then seat the metal frame over those abutments and picking those caps up in crown and bridge cement. Now, it could also be as simple as, hey, you know what? We're not going to do a metal strengthener. I'm just going to apply this Kevlar type mesh into the denture when I process it. And that's effective as well. NDX was the first group that showed me this, where they were designing these strengtheners in a CAD/CAM software, and they were milling them out of one of those high strength polymers. That made a lot of sense to me, and I started doing that. we're staying in the digital realm. We can really dial it in to fit where we are in the space, and we can really customize this thing. And a strengthener, is never, even in a traditional denture, but especially in an implant overdenture like this, is not designed to be the overall strength, right? It's just designed to kind of hold everything together. We all know that dentures will break around strengtheners. It's not a guarantee of anti-fracture, but yet it's a good system to kind of hold everything together. And I think these milled high-strength polymers do the same thing as the cast mesh. I would never really take the time to, wax and cast or design and cast a metal framework anymore. We have all these newer materials and technologies. So I'm going to show you in a minute where you could also do this without a strengthener, right? And with these high strength digital dentures we're making, I'm a lot more comfortable with that today. But back to this, right? So we're in the third appointment, right? And we're sending those abutments and those housings and the strengthener. And so the dentist is seating the abutments, torquing them down, putting the housings on, engaging them, and then picking up those housings into the metal framework with just typical crown and bridge cement, and just pull that out and send that back to the lab. Now, there could be one alternate step here if the tissue had changed a lot, right? You felt like, hey, we've had a lot of tissue loss here, so I'm going to take another impression. Then all we do is pick up that metal framework with the housings that's already captured crown and bridge cement. We pick that up in the new impression and just pull that. So that goes back to the lab, and the lab's going to do what they do, right? If the bite changed, the tissue changed, and the lab's going to create new model work, jump the setup over, and then go ahead and process that denture. Typically, we like to pick these up chair side, but the lab could do that in their spot as well. But again, what you're looking at is a traditionally processed acrylic with the meshwork, and on the right, you're looking at a printed process without a strengthener, but at the end of the day, it's a denture. So the fourth appointment, it was always my preference to do the pickup chair side. That's the most predictable for success because there's several steps. If we pick them up in the lab, that could go wrong, right? And then you're going to be digging them out chair side. So I think it's, more predictable and, less time if we just pick them up chair side. And there are various options out there that make it super easy. The Voco quick up or the easy pickup or the chair side pickup are all good materials. It worked great with traditional acrylic dentures and with the new printed dentures. You could use cold cure acrylic in this. It really wouldn't matter. But we're going to pick up those caps in the fourth appointment. So we've even made a framework. You've had that appointment to try that in and pick it up in crown and bridge. That goes back to the lab. The lab fabricates the denture, sends you everything back, and you're ready for pickup. So this is kind of what it looks like in a sequence. And so we start with appointment 1 of impressions. It goes to the lab for setup, comes back for the aesthetic inclusion check. Right, goes back to the lab for the framework. Third appointment, we're going to verify the framework, pick up those conus caps. With the sorry, I'm not sure what happened here. Apologize for. I think I just hit the wrong mouse button. Okay, and then finally, the fourth appointment is delivery. So, if we feel like we can get by without a strengthener, what changes? Well, we drop an appointment, really. That's all. It's the only difference. Everything else is the same. And so, sometimes if I was using that Kevlar mesh, we did it like this, right? We just said, we're going to set it up for the triana. We're going to print the prototype. You check it. If the bite's good, tooth position's good, then let me know and I'll go ahead and process. And I'll get the abutments design and I'll process, but I'll process it with that mesh strengthener embedded. So when we get to the delivery, right, and we're picking them up, this is where the magic millimeter protection comes into play. And Conus has these little circular gaskets or sleeves to help us. And this is a picture showing you how not to use them because it's easy to do this, right? They're very flexible and you stretch them out over the cap and you push them down over the cap, but these have been pushed too far. So if you notice, the magic millimeter is exposed on the buccal side of this one and almost all the way around on this one. And we've just simply stretched it and pushed it too far down to the gingiva. And so we've uncovered the magic millimeter, which means when we do the pickup, the acrylic's going to go where it shouldn't go. This is more what it should be. These little circles have actually a little skirt, I call it, that is designed to stay and cover that magic millimeter. And so what I've taken to do is I'll put these on to the housings before I hand them to the dentist to seat in the mouth so that they're already in the right spot. But this is the area you want to take just a second and double check all the way around and make sure that these sleeves aren't overly pushed on the housing so that we are protecting that magic millimeter. Because once we have that sleeve in the right place, then it's just a simple fact of putting the pickup material in and grabbing the housing that way. And when you take it out and pull the sleeve out, then your magic millimeter is open as it should be, and the swedging can happen. So this is kind of just some pictures of what this looks like. So the housings are a little bit bigger in diameter than locators. So they're going to take a little bit more room. But in the beginning, I thought that was going to be a problem, but it rarely is a problem. You just have to plan for it. Digital makes it easier, but we're just planning for it. So at the end, this is what you end up with. You have a denture that has a flange because this patient had a high lip line and needed to have it. And, this works out great. Good retention. So much so that some patients struggle with it. So we do gadgets. We do a little fingernail notch to help them. Some labs will actually make these little tools that a patient can do to, put in that little notch to help pry it down, whatever it takes. One of the things that we like to do, for all our removable, both locators and conus, we would make a sleep denture, and it'd just be a horseshoe. You see the holes. They weren't retentive by any means. I mean, they were designed to fit over the abutments, just a little bit of friction. If we wanted more retentive element, we would put some soft liner in those holes. But we would tell the patient, look, this is your sleep denture. And so that gave them the mindset, oh, you mean I sleep in this? Yeah, which means you got to take the conus denture out. Because these things, these give patients a lot of confidence. And once they get used to it, this is great. I can eat and chew and they're not moving. This is solid. I love having teeth again. And they will leave them in there. And I tell you, I promise you that if a patient leaves this in the mouth longer, than a week, they're probably going to be back in your office saying, hey, I can't get this thing out. The retention is that good. So we give them a sleep denture to kind of get their mindset about, hey, you need to take this thing out every day so you can clean it, obviously, but also so the retentive element doesn't get, overbearing so you can get it out. So, we started doing some other things. So you think about a case like this where there's a lot of bone loss. All right, how do you restore that, right? There's option, we could do, a flipper, acrylic partial, a cast partial. If we want to do implants and crown and bridge work, that's certainly doable. Done a lot of those, but you obviously are going to have to do some pretty creative contouring in the gingival of those bridges, right? You're going to have to use some pink porcelain and matching the tissue and all that can be a challenge. This became a good alternative because, again, it has the same occlusal rigidity. It's totally implant borne, as if something I was going to cement or screw into place. But it is removable, so we could extend that saddle and cover up that bone loss. And it was just a good option. Didn't do a ton of those, but it was a good option. This is one of the first all digital ones. So where everything from the planning to the end was done digital. So this guy, was a hot mess. All these teeth are going to come out, and we're going to place some implants right away, and start the healing process with the prototypes. So everything was loaded into design software. The teeth were virtually extracted, and the prototype dentures were designed. And then on surgery day, the teeth were extracted. And, the tissue was such a hot mess that, the surgeon decided, hey, let's put a couple of these trailer hitch balls in to kind of help hold the prototype in a more stable position while the healing occurs. So these, are never really going to engage. They're only going to stay in there during healing. But, we put a little soft liner in the prototype denture, and that helped us. So, it wasn't ideal. This was not his bite, but his bite wasn't 100% correct. But that's what prototyping is about, right? You get those implants in there, you get the healing started, and you start dialing this in, right? You see them periodically, and you start, tap, tap, grind, grind. You start adding, whatever to get the bite right, get the midline right. That's what the prototyping is for, right? That's what this period is for. Once that's done, though, right, we say, okay, he's been wearing these treatment dentures, healing dentures for a while. Everything looks good. The bone's solid. The implants are good. We've got the teeth where we like them. He's happy with the smile. He's happy with the gingival, the curve. Everything is there for him. So we're ready to go. So what do? Well, we scan those final adjusted prototypes, send that off to the lab, and the lab uses that data to say, hey, here's where the abutments need to go. Let's parallel them all up and then design the new denture around that, right, which is what you see here. and then we can go create that denture. And in this case, it was a milled denture, which is fine. Printed, milled, I'm, either one. If it's digital, I'm happy. But this was before we were printing dentures, and so milling was the way to go back then. And you can see that we've milled both the upper and lower, including the recesses for the conus. And this was one particular dentist who really wanted us to pick the housings up in the lab. So we just attached them to a reline jig, gave them some reference, and put the sleeves over it, trimmed them down a little bit, and then did some metal priming, sandblasting, that kind of stuff to get as much retention, and then picked them up and use that jig to hold everything in place. And luckily this worked out really well. So that was delivered, right? And so here we are, before, and here we are after. You can see all the implants in place. I thought it was a little overkill. I think 5 or 6 is plenty, but hey, doctor wanted to make sure. So that worked out great for that guy, and it was pretty much all digital. Now, I teach this workflow. This is the same with locators. If you have a patient that has either existing dentures or have a treatment denture, we can use those dentures and intraoral scanners to do this in one appointment. And again, this is a locator case. Obviously, it's maybe not a prototype, but with a conus type case, there is some prototyping that should happen to make sure the teeth are in the right spot. But whenever we get to that point, right, we can now complete it in 2 appointments. And what you're looking at is the way we do it. So patient has the dentures, right? And what we're going to do is a series of scans. We're going to take those existing dentures and we're going to do an impression wash in both the dentures. We're going to take those dentures out of the mouth and we're going to scan them 360. We're going to get the outside data, the inside data. We'll be able to see the cover screws. The abutments aren't in place. It's just the cover screws. And we're going to get a bite, right? So obviously we've done the prototyping with the bites where we want it. So we're going to take the bite where it stands. So upper and lower scans, a bite, that's 3 scans. Then we're going to go over to the mouth and we're going to scan without the scan post and then with the scan post. Right, we're going to scan it with just the cover screws, or if there's MUAs and other workflows or whatever, we're going to do an intraoral scan with the scan post. So wash impression in the dentures, we're going to scan that, we're going to scan the bite, then we're going to scan intraorally with the IO flows. That's the flow, the scan post you have to use for the conus. And then we're going to put the cover post back in, send the patient back out with their treatment denture. So the lab now has everything they need to go ahead and design not only the dentures, but also the abutments. And so we just do that, right? We design the dentures, we design the abutments, and the next appointment, we're delivering all those things to the office, right? The abutments, the caps, and the printed final denture, all digital. And so we're delivering on that next appointment. And, it works great, guys. I mean, that's the beauty of digital technology, intraoral scanners, and a combination of a little bit of analog work, right? The scan data of the wash impression is really good and accurate and predictable. So we took all the data, made these dentures. Now, give you an illustration of the retentive. I'll show you this guy. This guy was a farmer, Georgia, had no problem figuring out things and how to make them work. And so, explained the conus, we explained how retentive they were, but obviously we don't want to send him home until we see that he can put them in right and take them out, comfortably. And I want you to watch the first video. We explained what they were and say, okay, we need to see you get them out. So seated, and I want you to watch, how hard he's pulling, right? His knuckles are turning white, and eventually it breaks loose, right? Startled him a little bit, startled the rest of us, right? We said, well, okay, all right, no harm, no foul. And so then we took a second to explain to him, right? We said, hey, think about these are 4 beer glasses on top of 4 more beer glasses and how hard they are to pull apart in unison. How would you do that? And, he said, well, I'd probably wobble them a little bit. It's exactly the concept I'm trying to get you to think about when you're taking this out. So I want you to watch the second video. I'll show the first one again so you can see it. Now, much retention is there. And I want you to know that these 2 were recorded not 20 seconds apart, right? We explained a few more things to him, like, wiggle it a little bit and it'll come out easier, and put it right back in. So no adjustment whatsoever on the denture or the components. And so first time it was tough, pull. Oh, got him. Woo. Okay, that's good. All right, good retention. That's great, but we don't need to work so hard, right? Watch now. So, okay, I understand. And see how he's wiggling it? Boom, came right out. Did not lose one speck of retention. We just approached it a little bit differently. And we like to go through this with every patient, right? 4, 5, 6 times, because we want to make sure they're comfortable with this path of insertion and this path of removal. So that's the 2-appointment digital CONUS workflow. Same process if I'm doing locators, 2 appointments. So if we do it old school, right, we're probably 5 appointments, right? Those are the things and the steps we're doing. If I'm doing it in 2, right, I just went from 5 to 2. I mean, you could do the math, right, for your production, for your chair time, for, the lab is having it fewer times. It's just, it's a great time to be in dentistry. So I love this workflow. And now look, these are fees just average that I've heard from around the country. This has, I got no dog in this hunt. I have no idea what NDX charges, but this is just an estimation on my part because people ask me all the time. So, if I were to do a locator case with 2 implants, that might cost the doctor $1,000. If I did an all-on-X case, it might be 3, 4, even 5,000. But a CONUS is going to be halfway in the middle of that, right? And so lab fees are going to be all-on-X at the top of the mountain, locator at the bottom, and CONUS right in the middle. It just worked out that way every time with all even components and the time. But think about the appointments, right? And with the patients, the same thing. Patient may pay $30,000, $40,000 for an all-on-X. They may pay 10 for a locator, and they may pay 20 for a CONUS. So it's a wonderful, wonderful option. Remember, I'm not trying to say that it's the solution for everything. I'm just saying it's a great option. And NDX uses this, the loose film digital print denture system, is for their digital dentures, and it is a fully validated workflow with those CONUS abutments. So we're not guessing anymore, right? We know this works, and it's all been validated and tested. So that's a great solution as an option, right? It's the what else you got. Now, when we go back into the fixed world, right? If we want to do, the patient wants all-on-X. And so, how do we do that, right? We talked about locators, we talked about CONUS, but we look over to the right and we look at these, full arch things that are screwed in. What are the workflows in digital? And I'll go to the pinnacle right away and talk about this one. And there are various ones of these. I'm going to talk about this one workflow, one process, one product called BridgeBase. But all the major implant manufacturers have something like this. And what they've done is that they've taken technology and used it to our advantage. And what I mean by that is our scanners are incredibly accurate. Intraoral scanners today are more accurate than anything we've seen in quite some time. There used to be a time where we say lab scanners are more predictable, more accurate, more consistent than intraoral scanners, but they've become very close now. So we're very confident about our intraoral scans. So what companies have done is said, look, we need to create a scan post that really takes advantage of that. And there's tons of scan posts on the market. But in reality, when we're doing, let's just say typical crown and bridge, and you're putting the wand in and you're scanning a tooth prep, I think at best, we're probably only using 35 or 40% of the data. You don't need it all. 35 to 40% of the data from an intraoral scan of a tooth preparation is way more than we need. But with this kind of workflow, like I need, a titanium or a zirconia framework to fit, 4, 5, 6 different screws. And so a lot more accuracy is required. So what has happened is that these companies have made these super accurate scan posts. And this is just one of them. This is a bridge-based scan post. And it is a cylindrical, right, which is a little bit confusing to me. I would think there'd be a flat or a corner or a round, something, but not, it's cylindrical. But the secret that you maybe can't see, it looks matte, but if you look at it under a microscope, it's got these 10,000 microcrystals on it. So there's a gazillion reflective points here. And what happens is when you pass the wand over, it is capturing a massive amount of data. And that data, the lab has to use a special way to get it loaded up. But they do that, right? And they load it up to a very special software that creates these metal frameworks. So they call them superstructures or bridge-based bars. And it's designed in a pretty unique software. And then a file of that designed bar goes back to the lab so that the lab can design the actual prosthetic piece, the overlay, I call it. And, at that point, we're in a computer and we're building this thing over a virtual representation of that bar. And, we can make it out of whatever we want, right? It could be zirconia. It could be printed denture. It could be milled PMMA. It's all digital, right? It's just an STL file, but it's a super accurate STL file. Now, the bar in the meantime is being fabricated, and the manufacturing process is the most accurate we know of in our world today. And that is SLM, or selective laser melting. This is basically a 3D printed titanium bar in a machine that's as big as a room. And so, the doctor does a scan, right? This is after prototyping, right? So you look at the bottom left scan, 6 implants, 6 scan posts, intraoral scan, that data sent off to the lab uploads it a special way, order the bar's being designed, the file of the bar comes back to the lab while the bar's being printed, and the lab go ahead and make the overlay. And all of this data and all of this accuracy in the process, the scanning, the uploading, the software, and the printing of the metal, and then the printing or milling of the overlay, all of this culminates into what you see here, right? That is a zirconia overlay of a bridge-based bar. And you can kind of look at the margins of how well this thing fits, but watch the short video, right? So these 2 overlays, right? One's zirconia, one's a printed denture, were made before the bar ever came in, and the bar comes in, it drops in place, and the fit is immaculate. And guys, I got to tell you, every one of these I've seen fits like this, and it blows me away, the accuracy of the data. So all that's really left for the lab to do at this point is to glue these things together, right? Bond the bar to whatever overlay, zirconia, printed denture, whatever. And the resulting product is what you see is called bridge-based. Again, not the only one out there. There are others. This just happens to be my favorite, and I just want to give you a representation. So I'll show you the process. All right, so this is a prototype, right? The patient has been through all that, and the doctor scanned the prototype, right? All the bites done, the midline, everything's good. So he scans it first, takes it out, puts a scan post in, scans the scan post, scans the opposing, scans the bite, right? So it's not the easiest of scan appointments, but you do all those things. Bar comes in, check the fit, do the x-ray, boom, deliver it. Guys, we are scanning on one appointment and delivering the final on the next. Now, I'm still old school. I like to do a little bit of checking in the middle. And some labs are like this way. They will say, look, I'm going to send you the bar, and I'm going to send you a milled PMMA prototype or a printed PMMA prototype. I'm not going to glue them together. And it's really just to verify that the prototyping was correct and nothing's changed before we start milling zirconia, right? Before we get to the process of, cooking 15 hours zirconia chunk, let's do one final check. But I can tell you that Dr. Montana, Dr. Ludlow, they don't often do that because they know the predictability of all this accurate data is so good that we can literally go from scan to delivery. And if you notice what's missing in that conversation, there's no verification step, right? We don't need to put a little bar in and cut it and lute it together, because the data is so good that we're able to get this kind of accuracy from an intraoral scan. Now, it's not just all on X, full arch, right? I want you to look at this as an option for any implant bridge. So we could take a case like this, right? And it's a 3-unit bridge. We want to do a screw retained implant bridge, right? We can get those implants in there. We can get all the healing done, all the prototyping done, get the bite right. All right, patient comes in. We're going to take the cover screws out, the healing abutments out, and we're going to put the scan posts in. We're going to do the scans, and we're going to deliver that screw retained bridge, right, at the very next appointment. I mean, we are literally taking, this kind of workflow from what is normally 5 or 6 or 7 appointments and cutting it to 3 or 4 routinely. So I love the systems we have today, whether it's a single tooth, a 3-unit bridge, or an all on X. It does all start with the scan. So I'll review the bridge-based scans one more time so you can have an idea visually and show you some videos. So again, it's not the easiest scan appointment, right? Those cylindrical scan posts can be a little bit challenging, right, to capture. Most of the newer scanners work fine. The company's going to tell you that their scanner is better, but it really works with any scanner. They make these scan posts for all the major implants, right? They make them in versions that fit directly to implants, and they make them in versions that fit over MUAs. I'm a fan of putting an MUA on everything, right? Just stability, predictability, getting up out of the tissue, whatever, correcting angles. So most of them are over MUAs, but this system allows us to do it on either or any combination thereof. So pretty generic. We can use it just about anywhere. So there's a scan of the scan post, there's a scan of the MUAs, there's a scan of the prototype, there's a scan of the opposing, and there's a scan of the bite. So those 5 scans are what have to be accomplished for this to work. Now, this is a Dentsply product, and they have the scan strategies and the instructions and the guides, to tell you how best to attack this thing. And just, reach out to your rep, either from the lab or the company. So we're going to look at the workflow, right, to get an idea of what we're doing here. Once the scan has been sent by the lab to get that bar made, right, here are the files that come back, and the lab has this file, and you can see it has a margin. So then, in the lab, we're going to design that overlay, and we're going to either print it, mill it, whatever digital workflow we want to do. And, here's from my friends at PDL that you can see that they've done that prototype step and they didn't cement it. And so that's going to go to the doc for trying, one last time. Others say, no, I'm just going to go ahead and cement it, whether it's a zirconia overlay like the one on the left, or whether it's a printed denture overlay like the one on the right. So it's a mindset change, right? Across the top would be the traditional all on X workflow, right? There's a big impression. That's, not a fun appointment, model work, a jig to make sure that the impression and model are correct. If it's not, right, we got to correct it. Then once we get that done, then we're going to take a bite, then we're going to move through the steps of processing the restoration. Whereas now we're just going to take some scans, we're going to design everything in the virtual world, and we're going to make the restoration. And so that's the basic workflow, right? You can see that we're going to place the implants. Of course, we're going to plan them. We want to do a digital plan. And, somebody asked me the other week, where does photogrammetry fit into here? Well, this is an alternative to photogrammetry, right? These accurate scan posts give you an option to not have to use photogrammetry. Not to say that you can't use photogrammetry. It's just another tool to give us alignment to where everything is. And photogrammetry has more data. So some will say it's more accurate, but I asked Dr. Montana, prosthodontist from out in Arizona, because I knew that he'd done a lot of these. And I asked him in Chicago this year how many he'd done. He said, God, I'd have to count, but it's dozens. I'm up to dozens now. And I said, Dr. Montana, how many have not fit in the mouth? He said, 1. And so, okay, did you do photogrammetry in them? I said, no, they're just, the bridge-based scan bodies. So whatever planning and prep work we're going to do, right, and get the implants in there. Once the healing's done and we make our temporary or our prototype, we're going to dial it in. Is the bite right? It's a midline right? We're showing enough teeth for the patient. Is everything good? Once that's done, then we start our scanning and we get our process done for the restoration. So this is a step. This is one of Dr. Ludlow's at Utah Dental School that he's done a lot of the initial validation in the U.S. This product's been around in Europe for 9 years, and we've just had it in the U.S. for a couple now. But you can see that he did some planning, right? So there's his surgical guide. He's placing the implants. There's the temporary prototype, provisional implant restoration on the lower, and an upper denture. This was going to be just a digital upper denture opposing a bridge-based lower. So go through the healing process, and now we're ready to start. So as far as the upper denture goes, we're going to make a digital denture. So we're going to do an impression wash and do that. But here we are scanning, right? Here is the lower prototype. So the scan of the prototype, and notice things like, the speed, he's capturing everything pretty quick, but you'll also notice that he's going to really have to put some effort in, but he's going to capture as much tissue information as he can, around the base of this thing. Retromolar pad data is, really important to have, because what, the lab's got to do is got to mesh all these things together. And so we need that additional tissue data to help us do that. That's why I've said that it's not the easiest of scan appointments, but the scanners today have made it much easier. So, dial that in, let it set up, not bad. But you can see across the bottom that he's got 5 catalogs. Those are the 5 scans that we talked about having. So here's the upper denture, just a traditional digital denture, the prototype, the healing denture, impression wash, and that's going to come out. And, we're going to scan that with what we're using. We're using a prime scan here. So we're, going to scan the impression wash and the buccal surface of the denture in case the teeth have been adjusted. And that's data that we're going to need. Then we're going to put them together. We're going to record the bite registration. So now we're in the 3rd scan and we're recording the buccal bite. And I recommend scanning all the way around. Some people just scan the posterior quadrant, which works, but I like to have all that data. And then the next scan is in the mouth. Two scans, actually. The first scan is going to be with just the MUAs, and the second scan with the scan post. Again, another benefit of the newer scanners is that they get through this pretty well. It used to be that these shiny silver things would cause us all kinds of problems trying to scan, but today's technology, like the Prom scan, does an incredible job of capturing that. But you can start to see why that tissue data is important, because I want to line this scan up with that scan the prototype was on, and I'll need that tissue areas to help do that. Then we go in with the scan bodies. And again, doing the same thing, we're going to capture that tissue data as well, but we also have to make sure that we capture the scan posts really accurately. When we get scans of these bridge-based scan bodies where there's data holes, or you can see the lingual all there hadn't been captured yet, anything like that, that's the cases where we have fit problems. So it's important that we take advantage of those 10,000 microcrystals and capture all that data. That's what makes the bar fit so well. And so now you can see all the data compiled on the design screen, and it's just a simple fact of saying, okay, let's go design this thing. And so the bar is designed, the file comes back, the temp overlay is made, and it goes in the mouth. And this is why I like to do a temp overlay, right? You can see, well, we really missed the midline here. And so if we had milled that zirconia and tried to deliver the final that day, we'd be in a world of hurt. So we go through that prototyping once just to make sure, make the corrections, and then go to the final. So we made it 4 appointments instead of 3. And this is an example of the workflow that if the same bar, but we wanted to print, a digital denture overlay instead of zirconia. Why would you want to do that? Well, in this case, it was because the upper was a printed digital denture. And so like against like. Cost would be another thing. This would be more affordable than the zirconia overlay. And, with today's materials, we have the strength. We're not worried about the strength of that. And, this is what I see as a trend. We're moving to a trend of these all-on-X restorations where we're putting some sort of titanium understructure, and maybe it's zirconia, maybe it's PMMA, maybe it's printed polymers, but the end result was this guy was in, just in a jumbled mess. And this was a great result. The digital denture had really, really good retention. So he went out a happy man. So great solution, great workflow, for all on fixed. This QR code, if you have information that you'd like to get back from me, that's my contact info, and you can scan that and reach out to me, and I'm happy to help you in any way I can. But our host here, National Dentex, obviously very familiar with all these workflows. Some of these things that you've seen tonight, they helped me do, right? They're really good at this, and they've always led the country in the digital realm, and they have a team of specialists that help you with your intraoral scanners. That's awesome. And so you have a problem, having trouble scan, just call Kelly and her team, and they can help you.